A few years ago, a consumer advocacy group decided to ask a very simple question. They weren't trying to start a scandal. They weren't trying to accuse anyone of wrongdoing. They just wanted clarity. The question was about deodorant. More specifically, about one ingredient found in many deodorant and antiperspirant products sold across the United States. The group contacted several major deodorant manufacturers and asked a straightforward question. Why is this ingredient still in your product? The responses they received were surprisingly similar. Different companies, different brands, but the same explanation appeared again and again. It's within legal limits. For regulators, that phrase has a very specific meaning. It means that the ingredient has been evaluated and approved for use at certain concentrations. It means the amount present in the product falls below the threshold considered safe by regulatory agencies. And technically, that should reassure consumers. But for many people, the phrase raises another question. Just because something is within legal limits, does that automatically mean it's the best choice for daily use? Today, we're going to explore that question. Because the ingredient at the center of the conversation is something millions of people apply to their skin every single day, sometimes twice a day, often for decades. And it appears in deodorant brands found in almost every grocery store and pharmacy in the country. Before we reveal the ingredient itself, it helps to understand how deodorants actually work. There are two main types of products sold under the deodorant category. The first type is deodorant. These products focus on controlling odor. They do this by targeting the bacteria that live on the skin. Body odor doesn't come from sweat itself. Sweat is mostly water and salt. The smell develops when bacteria break down certain compounds in sweat. Deodorants use antimicrobial ingredients and fragrance to reduce or mask that odor. The second type is antiperspirant. Antiperspirants work differently. Instead of just controlling odor, they reduce sweat itself. And to do that, they rely on a specific class of compounds, aluminum salts. These salts temporarily block sweat ducts, reducing the amount of moisture that reaches the surface of the skin. Less sweat means fewer conditions for odor-causing bacteria to thrive. And for many people, antiperspirants are incredibly effective. But aluminum salts are also the ingredient that sparked the question from consumer advocates. Because aluminum is not just any chemical, it's a metal. A naturally occurring element found in soil, water, and food. We're exposed to small amounts of aluminum every day through our environment. But when aluminum compounds are applied to the skin, especially repeatedly over long periods, scientists naturally want to understand how the body interacts with them. The specific compounds used in antiperspirants include ingredients like aluminum chlorohydrate and aluminum zirconium. These compounds dissolve in sweat and form temporary plugs inside the sweat glands. The plugs gradually break down and wash away during bathing. But during the time they remain in the sweat ducts, they reduce perspiration significantly. For most people, this process works exactly as intended. Sweating decreases, odor becomes easier to control, and daily routines continue without interruption. But the use of aluminum in antiperspirants has been debated for decades. Some researchers have explored whether aluminum could be absorbed through the skin. Others have examined potential links between aluminum exposure and various health conditions. So far, the majority of scientific studies have not found convincing evidence linking antiperspirant use to serious health risks. Major organizations, including the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute, have stated that current evidence does not support a clear connection between antiperspirants and diseases like breast cancer. But the topic continues to attract attention because the underarm area has some unique characteristics. The skin there is relatively thin. Hair follicles create additional pathways through the skin barrier. And many people apply deodorant immediately after shaving, which can temporarily increase skin permeability. Because of these factors, scientists have conducted studies to measure how much aluminum if any, enters the bloodstream after antiperspirant use. The results suggest that only a very small fraction of aluminum applied to the skin is absorbed. Most of it remains on the surface and is washed away later. Still, consumer interest in the topic continues to grow. And that's why the advocacy group decided to contact several deodorant brands directly. The brands included some of the biggest names in the industry: Old Spice, Secret, Degree, Dove, Gillette, Right Guard, and Mitchum. Each company was asked essentially the same question: why continue using aluminum compounds in antiperspirants when some consumers are concerned about them? The answers were polite, professional, and almost identical in tone. Company representatives emphasized that their products comply with all regulatory guidelines. They pointed out that aluminum compounds used in antiperspirants have been reviewed by safety organizations for decades. They also noted that the concentrations used in their products fall well within limits considered safe by regulatory authorities. And again, the phrase appeared: it's within legal limits. From a regulatory standpoint, that answer is accurate. The FDA classifies antiperspirants as over-the-counter drugs, which means their active ingredients are regulated under specific guidelines. Manufacturers must follow strict concentration limits and labeling requirements, but the phrase legal limits can sometimes sound unsatisfying to consumers, because it doesn't necessarily explain how those limits were determined, or how they might change as scientific research evolves. And that's where the conversation becomes more interesting, because the next question isn't simply whether aluminum compounds are allowed. It's why they became the dominant solution for controlling sweat in the first place, and whether newer alternatives might one day replace them. In the next part of this story, we'll look at how deodorant technology evolved over the past century, and why some modern brands are now moving away from aluminum entirely, even though it remains approved for use today. To understand why aluminum became the foundation of modern antiperspirants, you have to go back more than 100 years. Long before spray cans and roll-on sticks filled store shelves, people were already searching for ways to control body odor and sweat. Early deodorants in the late 19th century focused mainly on odor. They used simple antiseptic ingredients to reduce the bacteria responsible for smell, but they didn't stop sweating. The first real antiperspirant appeared in the early 1900s. It used aluminum salts to reduce perspiration by narrowing the openings of sweat glands. The idea worked remarkably well. For the first time, people could dramatically reduce underarm sweat instead of just masking the odor afterward. But the early formulas were far from perfect. Some were acidic enough to irritate the skin, others could even damage clothing. Over time, chemists refined the formulas. They developed aluminum chlorohydrate and aluminum zirconium compounds that were more stable and less irritating. By the mid-20th century, antiperspirants had become a staple in American households. And because they were so effective, aluminum salt quickly became the standard active ingredient. Even today, nearly every antiperspirant sold in stores still relies on aluminum compounds. Which brings us back to the question consumer advocates asked the deodorant companies. If aluminum has been debated for so long, why haven't manufacturers replaced it entirely? The answer is surprisingly simple, because nothing else works quite the same way. Aluminum salts physically reduce sweat production. Most alternative deodorant ingredients do not. Instead, they focus on controlling odor after sweat appears. For example, many aluminum-free deodorants use baking soda. Baking soda helps neutralize odor by changing the pH level of the skin. Odor-causing bacteria tend to thrive in slightly acidic environments. By raising the pH, baking soda makes it harder for those bacteria to grow. But baking soda has its own challenges because it is alkaline. It can irritate sensitive skin for some people. Others may develop redness or itching after repeated use. Another common ingredient in aluminum-free deodorant is magnesium hydroxide. This compound works similarly by neutralizing odor without blocking sweat glands. It tends to be gentler than baking soda, which is why some natural deodorant brands prefer it. There are also deodorants that rely on antimicrobial plant extracts like tea tree oil or witch hazel. These ingredients reduce odor-causing bacteria without affecting sweat production. And then there are acid-based deodorants that work by lowering the skin's pH instead of raising it. These products make the environment less friendly for odor-producing microbes. Each of these approaches has advantages, but none of them completely replaces the sweat-blocking effect of aluminum salts. That's why many consumers who switch to aluminum-free deodorants notice something immediately. They sweat more. That doesn't necessarily mean the deodorant isn't working. It simply means the product is controlling odor rather than stopping sweat. And for some people, that difference matters. Sweat itself isn't harmful. In fact, sweating plays an essential role in regulating body temperature. But socially and culturally, visible sweat can make people uncomfortable. That's why antiperspirants remain so popular. They solve a practical problem many people deal with every day. Still, the growing interest in aluminum-free products has pushed the deodorant industry to evolve. Today, many major brands offer both options: traditional antiperspirants with aluminum, and aluminum-free deodorants that rely on odor control instead. Some companies have even invested heavily in research to develop new technologies. Microbiome-focused deodorants are one example. These products aim to support beneficial bacteria on the skin while suppressing odor-causing microbes. The goal is not to eliminate bacteria entirely, but to encourage a healthier balance. Other brands are experimenting with enzyme-based formulas designed to break down odor molecules before they become noticeable. Whether these technologies will eventually replace aluminum-based antiperspirants remains uncertain. For now, aluminum salts remain the most reliable method for reducing sweat itself. And that brings us back to the phrase companies used in their responses: "It's within legal limits." From a regulatory perspective, that statement reflects decades of safety reviews. Health agencies evaluate ingredients based on available scientific evidence. They establish limits designed to keep exposure levels within ranges considered safe. When companies say their products fall within those limits, they are acknowledging that their formulas meet those standards. But consumer awareness continues to evolve. More people today read ingredient labels than ever before. They ask questions about how products work. They explore alternatives. And they decide what feels right for their own routines. For some, that means sticking with traditional antiperspirants because they work extremely well. For others, it means choosing aluminum-free deodorants even if they allow natural sweating. Both approaches exist in today's marketplace, and both reflect something important about modern consumers. People want choices, they want information, and they want the ability to decide what they apply to their bodies every day. So the next time you pick up a deodorant at the store, you might notice something you never paid attention to before. The small line on the label that says either antiperspirant or simply deodorant, behind that tiny difference lies more than a century of chemistry, research, and debate. And perhaps the most interesting part of the story is that the ingredient approved decades ago, the one companies still defend as being within legal limits, remains one of the most effective solutions scientists have ever developed for controlling sweat. Whether that continues for another 50 years, or whether new technologies eventually replace it, is a question researchers are still trying to answer today.